Welcome, Scott. I am super thrilled to have you here. I was actually really looking forward to connecting in our conversation.
I know I'm super grateful that you brought me on as well. And you built like such a wonderful community, and I've listened to your podcast before I jumped on, and I love it. And I think that it's a very important podcast because a lot of the stuff I speak about, and a lot of the stuff that's really like glorified on the internet is entrepreneurship, but I've also made the argument that entrepreneurship isn't the only path to success or happiness or fulfillment. And there's ways to be very strategic about a career. And there's ways to be very strategic about a career, even if you are interested in entrepreneurship. I think there's a lot of ideas that we can unpack there. And I want to reinforce it, even if you listen to the majority of my content, which focuses on people that are trying to build their own thing. Um, I have a lot of uh, I have a lot of respect for people that understand what they actually want to achieve in life and pursue whatever work or goal or track gets them there. And I think that just following what the loudest person on the internet says is going to be the best version of your life is not the proper way to to architect your life. And I think that we have over-indexed on average, especially in the world that I'm in, on entrepreneurship and hustle culture and make money at all costs. And I think that's toxic and unhealthy. So I actually really respect the community that you're building, which helps people understand the value of actual career, which is definitely, I think, the proper path for the majority of people. But anyways, you can go into whatever you want to, but I think that this is a very important discussion because I see too many discussions about entrepreneurship and not enough discussions about how to thrive outside of building a company from scratch, which is, I have a lot of friends that make a lot of money and they've never built anything. So we can talk about we can talk about exactly how they do that.
I love it. And that's good clarification. And, I feel like career working for somebody else or building your own thing and entrepreneurship, those are just different forms, and
Correct.
maybe they vary depending on the stage of life, and you can go from one to another. It's kind of not a set thing, but I think a lot of your ideas are very applicable in either scenario, right? And like you
I
said,
agree with
it
that.
would be
Yeah.
very individual, and context is everything. There's no really very very few quotes or reels are an absolute advice, right? That applies to
Correct.
every situation. So, and I also wanted to start out with commending you and acknowledging kind of the level of communication, the level of sophistication and precision of and finesse of how you use your words. Because just like you, I
Thank you.
listened to some of your podcasts. I originally heard about you from an interview you did with Kathy Heller, and then you shared that you have a podcast, and I thought that you shared ideas that are original, you phrase them differently. And I think it's really refreshing in this day and age, kind of what you were saying, that there's a lot of content about entrepreneurship. And just
Mm.
like an entrepreneur can take a break at 10 a.m., so can you if you work in the corporate world, right? It's not all or nothing or an everyday thing. And I just really, really appreciate, and I'm sure that there's a lot of work that's gone behind the scenes and into developing kind of the level of mastery over communication that you have.
Mm. I think that, yeah, so a couple so I appreciate you very much. I think that sometimes the level of mastery over communication, and it's very kind of you to say, but I think that's just for me talking all day with people because it's my job now. And I think that I try and continue to improve my communication because that's how good ideas are passed down. And the people that I respect the most, they're incredible communicators and storytellers. But you made an interesting point about like sort of repackaging ideas in different ways. I've thought about this a lot, and I think that the reason maybe why my content seems a little bit different than a lot of what you hear on the internet, and I'm not saying that my content is the best on the internet. There's a lot of other people that probably have similar styles of contextualizing or putting forth ideas, but I try and understand that dualities exist and two ideas can be true at the same time. And I think that applies in business. I think it applies in politics. I think it applies in any field that more often than not, to play into an algorithm, people pick extremes. So
Mhm.
people will say, let's use business context. People say you're a loser if you just work for somebody and you aren't an entrepreneur. You're not ambitious. You're not you're not living your best life. You're not achieving success, however you want to define that. They're doing that probably full well knowing that that's not true. They're probably saying that because they know that if they take a stance, they're going to build a community or a tribe around that particular stance, and they're going to have polarizing opinions, and that's what's going to drive the algorithm, and that's what's going to get them followers and likes and shares and comments and subscribes and money. And the creators that I look up to in business, in politics, in fitness, you see a lot of this too. People taking extreme sides, the religion extremes, right? People that I look up to understand that two things can be true at the same time, and understand that most people don't fall into these super polarized ideological camps. Most people uh, hold many truths at the same time, or can understand that you can succeed in career and you can succeed as an entrepreneur. And maybe one is good for one person, one is good for the other person, and you're not a loser if you choose one versus the other. And I think that that is the perspective that I take through life, which I think maybe is why some of my content is a little bit different, because I try not to be like extreme, because
Mm.
extremes aren't real. Extremes are fake, and extremes, in my opinion, are what drive um, all the toxicity in social media across the board. So I try and sort of, probably to my own detriment, not take extreme opinions on things when I do know for a fact that the other side of the argument can also be true at the same time.
I love it. There's so many things that you brought up. Like one of them, I swear, I was earlier today thinking about how the human psychology is that we want a black and white answer. We
Yeah.
want a simple answer. And I'm sure like the whole extreme, taking positions that are very firm and strong, it gives people that, right? It plays into that psychology, and it also plays into getting the attention, because attention is a day trading, as Gary Vee, I think he said
Hmm.
that. And
That's Gary Vee. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you talked about like the attention rate, how people are monetizing our anxieties, our emotions,
Yeah.
the ups and downs, and we end up living day to day. Even just the other day, I was talking to my friend, and she's taking a break from social media because she was so riled up, like about the world events, all the politics. And I love the points and how you make the points of that we are not supposed to care for everything, but when we kind of scroll and follow all of the
Hmm.
ups and downs and ride the roller coaster. Um, our dreams collect dust.
Think about, I mean, we can talk about how toxic social media is. I'm pretty sure everybody agrees with that. But algorithms and echo chambers in social media really exist. So you only see ideas that reconfirm your own worldview. So you sort of fall into this trap of believing that your worldview is the only right view, or correct view. But the issue with social media is just, I mean, if we go back in history, we were not meant to be exposed to all these traumatic events every single day. We weren't supposed to know that somebody was killed in Europe, or there was a horrible environmental disaster in Australia, or there was a terrorist attack in this country. Like, we weren't supposed to know that, because as humans, we didn't have access to that information. We were supposed to know what was happening, like, in our village, and that was sort of the extent of our immediate stressors, right? So when we are exposed to this all the time, um, on a, and uh, uh, I'm not a PhD by any means, but I do know that cortisol is not good for the human body, and we live in a constant elevated state of high cortisol, combined with the fact that work is difficult and life is difficult, and now we're exposed to all these anxiety-inducing, stress-inducing ideas 24/7. And I think that, and the reason why we are exposed to these ideas is because these ideas play into our psyche, into our biological psyche, and sort of our brain has been uh, around for quite a while now, and our brain has not evolved to understand that in our subconscious that these ideas are not immediate threats. It perceives them as real threats. And I mean, news organizations have known this for a long time. That's why you see all the negative news headlines and the clickbait titles. And, you know, creators on Twitter know this. They know that if they say something super polarizing or they share this breaking horrific news, they're going to get more tweets and impressions and retweets. And all of it ties back to how are people making money off of our psyche? It's by hijacking it all the time with angry news and horrible news and horrific ideas. And I think that listen, I don't know an immediate answer outside of just shutting off from all of the inputs, which I think is a very healthy thing to do. Like go for a walk, shut off your phone, maybe don't scroll on Twitter right before you go to bed or first thing in the morning. Um, but I think that this also plays into uh, our ability or to really make smart decisions about what we want to do with our life, because forget politics and world disasters. We're being constantly bombarded with we're not good enough, we're not making enough money, the career that we chose is stupid, you're nothing if you are an entrepreneur, don't make so much money per year, don't have a family. Like we're always told like we're not what we should be, and that those signals operate through the same channels, and also kind of going back to the point that I had at the beginning, they make us question this path that we're on. Are we good enough? Are we doing the right thing? And I think that just is leading to mental health issues, depression, anxiety across the board. And yeah, I think that we live in a very listen, I love technology. I mean, I've made my living right now off social media. I love everything that's available to us, but at the same time, I think that people have to be just a little bit aware of all the different inputs that are hijacking their mind without maybe their knowledge and definitely not their consent.
So those are the two sides to the story, or the duality,
Yeah,
the good and the
yeah, that's
bad.
exactly. It's good and bad at the same time. Both ideas are true. Same with AI. It's good and bad at the same time.
We can wrap at that, but let's maybe go into your own success story. So you have
Sure.
a very popular podcast and very successful podcast called Success Story. So tell
And
us
it's not
what.
it's not self-serving, it's about other people. Just to make sure that everyone's clear.
uh, so tell us, what is Scott's success story? Where did it start?
I don't think that it's ever finished. I think that that's like a sort of a view that I have on life in general. I think that it's always ongoing. It started. I didn't have a crazy origin story. I grew up in a pretty middle class, upper middle class home. My parents both worked 9 to 5. My dad worked for the government. My mom worked for university. She took some time off when she had my brother, and we were fortunate enough that she could do that. We were quite comfortable. I actually didn't have this horrible origin story that prompted me to go out and to go build businesses and to go on my own. I've said this often. The reason why I didn't sort of follow directly in the path of what I saw my parents doing was because I felt that, and I think that younger people. I'm 34. I think younger people feel this. They really feel this. Um, they have for people that came up in a pretty comfortable upbringing when they were younger. I think most of us want to emulate that for our own families. I think that we want to be, hey, like, listen, we were fortunate enough to have a nice attached home. We could play sports. We could go do like the extracurriculars. Went to a decent school, and I think that most people, if that's kind of like the typical American dream, right? Like they just want like the white picket fence, the go on vacations every once in a year, like take care of their family. If something happens that's unexpected, they can afford it. Um, that's what most people want. Most people don't feel the need to work 20 hours a day to make, a massive company that's going to exit for 10, 50, 100 million plus dollars. I think most people are actually quite happy um, making a good salary and taking care of their family. And that's what I wanted to emulate for my family, because I saw that's what my dad and my mom also provided for us. But I thought that I was looking at sort of very early on cost of living and retirement and pension and what it would take to sort of copy the environment that I had growing up. And in my mind, if I followed the exact same path as my parents, I wouldn't in the short term achieve the same results, because pensions didn't exist the same way they did. salaries didn't compete with the home prices. Like I was just doing math, and I realized that okay, maybe I can be a little bit more aggressive and take a few more risks early on, and see if that can afford me the same quality of life that I grew up with a little bit earlier. And that was really that was it. That was like the inflection point that pushed me away from maybe a safer career path and moving into tech when I was really young. I saw a company that was acquired because of just really just through my career and my luck. One of the companies that I was brought into was acquired by private equity, and all these little signals of wow, entrepreneurship is so cool, and oh my goodness, I just saw how much this company was acquired for. That's a huge sum of money. And I'm like, well, I believe that if I play this game long enough and I figure out how to build a company, maybe I can have some sort of exit event like that. Or anyway, so I just kept exposing myself to, I guess people would consider it sort of like higher risk career paths. And I learned from that exposure, which like if we fast forward now, podcast is my company, right? Like that is my company that I'm building right now, and that is my business. And that is my version of entrepreneurship that I'm living right now. And I've built other things in the past, and some have worked and some haven't. But it was just constant exposure to different in pursuit of, ironically, achieving the same thing as what my parents had, which in turn led me to living a life that I probably wouldn't have ever expected. But that was really my journey. And I think everybody has their own journey. I don't think you have to necessarily come from like a horrible upbringing to want to try to do things differently. I think that you just have to understand what your own personal goals are, which I think is that's the moral of the story. Like, what are your own personal goals? And are you taking actions against those in pursuit of those goals? Like, what is your personal North Star? And that I think is my biggest advantage. I've always kind of known what my personal North Star is, and it changes all the time. But the point is, I know what mine is. I think that too many people who find themselves unhappy in their work or in their business, or even if they're building something, it's because they don't know what their own personal North Star is, and they haven't been pursuing it. And then they find themselves out of alignment. And that's when you get depression about your career or lack of fulfillment or anxiety. So I think my superpower has just been, you know what? This is what I want, and I'm going to figure out a way to get it. And just and I know that that's going to be risky, but at least I feel like I'm on the right path. I wish more people just felt like they're on the right path. And I say that because that will lead into the conversation about whether or not you want to be an entrepreneur or not. It doesn't really matter, like at all.
Mhm.
But know that if you want to be an entrepreneur, then please like go pursue that, or else you're going to regret it on your deathbed. And if you're building a company and you're like, you know what? I'm building this company and I'm living this entrepreneur dream, meaning like you're working like 16 plus hours a day and you have no free time and you're stressed all the time and you have all this anxiety and everything's on you. And you're like, you know what? I followed this other path that somebody on the internet told me I should follow. Somebody on the internet said I'm not worth anything unless I'm an entrepreneur, and I did it. And now I'm not happy. And now I don't get to spend time with my spouse or my kids. I don't see my family. I don't see my friends, and I'm miserable. Well, then stop following that path
Mhm.
and then choose something that actually fits your North Star, and choose something that fits your personality and your goals. And you can be very happy and successful financially and otherwise uh, working within a company. So I think that my journey, I'm just very fortunate to have, I guess, the courage to follow my North Star repeatedly. And I wish more people did.
When did you get clarity? When did you know what your goals or that North Star is for you, and how has it changed?
I think that it's never been completely clear. The point is, directionally, I know where I want to go. So I think that nobody who says their goal, nobody who says that their goal is 100% clear, and sorry, excuse me, anybody who says their goal is 100% clear from the day they were born is lying to you, because goals definitely change. Because the more information you get, you will take that information, you'll learn from it, and by virtue of you just becoming a wiser, smarter, more experienced person, your understanding of the world will change and your goals will change accordingly. Um, but to answer your question, like when I was 15, 16, I was mapping out retirement, career, future, cost of living, home purchase. And I was just doing math and I was looking at the jobs that I could apply for and the salaries they were paying. And I'm like, okay, like this really isn't adding up. Like it's not like some esoterical idea. It's like the math isn't mathing. If I make this much money and I look at, best possible opportunity, but where I could progress, if I don't go to law school or I don't um, achieve this level of career success, and I have to have this much money saved up to retire by 65, and these are just the ideas that I'm having when I'm like 16, right? Then I don't think I'm going to be living the life that I really want to be living. So then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, so my goals are not aligning with my outcome. So I better figure out my actions are not aligning with my outcome or my ideal goal, excuse me. So I better figure out actions that could potentially lead there. And then you constantly recalibrate and readjust as you get more information and as you try something new. Um, and you get feedback from that new thing, meaning like you take a new career or you start a new business or you take feedback from that and you're like, okay, am I moving closer to what my ideal goal is? And also, is that still my ideal goal? I
Mhm.
think it's also important. When I was 16, and I think when I'm 16, I'm trying to think of when I first started sort of thinking this way. But when I'm 16, like money was very important to me. And then when you start to make a lot of money, or even like a little bit of money, you're like, okay, so how important is money now? If I make X amount more, is that going to buy me something that I really want or afford me a lifestyle that I really want? And how much work is it going to take to get me to that next zero or that next comma? Like, how much work is it really going to take? And what do I sacrifice for that work? And now that I'm 34, I want to sacrifice a lot less because I want to have a family. Now, if I didn't want to have a family and I didn't want to spend any time with kids or anyone else, well, then that's a different goal, but that's not my goal now. But when I was 16, I wasn't thinking about, you know, I want to be present with my kids. And I didn't have the context yet. I didn't understand, in my opinion, what it takes sometimes to be successful financially. I put that in air quotes because there's a lot of other ways to define success. So when I'm young, all I'm like, just work as much as you can, make as much money as you can. But then when you start to make some money, you're like, you know what? That extra additional money isn't going to make me that much happier. So let me find a way to optimize the work that I do so that I do have that, that space for family and kids and other things that I now find to be a priority. I think that's that's an important thing to include as well. Like you don't just set off on one goal and just stick with it forever. I think that there's seasons to people's lives and they have to understand how much of their life they want to commit to a particular season and when does that season change. And if you don't achieve your goals by the end of that season, then what's the backup? And in my mind, I always thought like, listen, if I don't make some sort of progress towards my goals by the time I'm 30, I'll go back to school, I'll go back to law school, I'll choose like a safer path. I'll be very ambitious and be very aggressive about my career, but I'll go work for somebody because I don't want to be playing this high risk game until I'm 60.
Mhm.
That was my thought process when I first sort of went out into the working world and was just trying to figure out where I was going to go in life. Um, but
That
yeah,
was
I
pretty
hope that
amazing
gives some
to
help
have
and
like
context.
that was pretty amazing to have those kind of thoughts at 16. That's so early on.
Yeah, it is very early on. I think the biggest thing for me was I saw, like, for the average worker, if you're not aggressive about your career, I saw how comfortable people were that were my parents and grandparents' age in retirement. And that's usually for most people growing up who have only been exposed to like work until you're 65 and then retire.
Mhm.
And for a lot of grandparents out there and some parents, they have a type of pension that used to exist that doesn't really exist anymore in most private companies, where you get a certain percentage of how much you make over your best year. So, to make the math simple, how my dad and my grandpa's jobs worked in government, and I think you still get this in some government, but it used to exist in private companies too. Say you make $100,000, that's the most you've ever made, and you make that for 5 years straight, your pension could be 70% of that. So when you retire at 65, there's a pension fund that pays you $70,000 for not working until the day that you die. That is how pensions used to work, more or less. Now you have contributions. So if you put in so much of your paycheck, your employer will put that much in as well, but you don't have like a set amount. So you still have to hope you have this big bucket of money when you retire, and then you have to basically space it out accordingly, and you have to like figure out, okay, so if I'm like 65, 70, and I have 10 million bucks that I've saved and invested over the course of my life, and I start to liquidate that every single year, and how long am I going to live, and how much money should I take out every single month, and I'm going to try and do some math. Like it's first of all, you have to make sure that you save. That's important, and invest properly. So it's a little bit, the onus is more on you, but it's not the same as just having this like very safe, secure retirement. Fast forward, I actually have very different opinions about retirement now, but the point is, at the time, I'm just trying to emulate what my family had. I'm just trying to emulate what my dad had. I'm just trying to emulate the life that seemed pretty damn good at the time. And I realized that that kind of pension doesn't really exist. So if that pension doesn't really exist, and I'm doing some math and I'm trying to figure out, okay, so how much money do I have to make? Where do I have to invest? I have to learn how to invest. My dad never had to really learn how to invest. He can do it, but he never had to learn. He never had to. Now I have to. So I'm living a different life. So let me play a different game. And I think that too many people, just in general, don't understand that their life is playing someone else's game, or a game that doesn't exist anymore, and they're not consciously trying to figure out, what game do I want to play, and who are, what are the dynamics of the game that exists in 2025. And that's what I wish more people would understand, career or entrepreneur or otherwise. How do I structure an entrepreneur life? How do I structure a career life so that I'm playing the game that exists now? And when they understand and hopefully realize that if you've been in a career for 30 years and you have loyalty to your company, and you haven't upskilled and you haven't learned new skills, and you think that your career is safe, and all of a sudden over COVID you get laid off, and now you're SOL because you've never done any work on yourself, and you've never really even thought about updating your resume, and you've never taken continuing education. You weren't playing the game that exists now. You were playing the game that you thought exists, but you just lost, and
Yeah.
now you're scrambling. So the goal of all of this is to learn the game that you should be playing, and to selfishly future-proof yourself so that you can be successful in any outcome of the game that exists in 2025, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you might not like the word that I'm using, clarity, but
Yeah,
that's the
it's a
best
great
word
word.
that comes to me. But like, to have such clarity, like when you're in high school, right? And
Yeah.
already, I mean, it explains why you also are where you're at 34. But can you tell us, so what is, okay, you have this thinking. So where do you go from there? You're thinking this law school, but what do you do? Like, what subjects you liked in high school, and what do you decide when you graduate from
What
high
what
school?
subjects did I, so in high school, what subject? High school was very easy for me. High school was actually a little too easy for me, and that screwed me over in university, because in high school I didn't really have to try that hard. And in university, when I was just partying and drinking, and I realized you do have to care like a little bit about school, and it actually took me a little bit longer to complete my degree because I was messing around and not taking it seriously. Um, uh, in high school, that's a really great question. I hate
You hated school.
I'm I didn't like hate it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Like, I found a lot of it boring.
Mhm.
I found it like very boring, and I guess my favorite topics were, and my undergrad was in like pre-law. So I was still like setting myself up. So my undergrad was in pre-law. In my mind, I'm like, I just want to get a bachelor's. That was kind of like what was expected. My parents wanted me to get the bachelor's degree. So I had a pre-law undergrad. Never went to law school. Uh, I loved law. I really liked law. I really did enjoy it quite a bit. I didn't enjoy like math or science as much, but I enjoy like critical thought. I enjoy debate. I enjoy great ideas, and I think law lends itself to that uh, quite easily. I think that um, yeah, I really enjoyed the thought of sort of debating somebody, and sort of intellectually trying to compete in the world. I guess that's, why I enjoy the podcast, because I interview such like interesting people, and they always sort of challenge. my ideas, and I learned so much from them. But I think that was probably the most fun subject. I didn't enjoy much else. Um, so yeah, so then went to pre-law, finished my undergrad, was working. I've worked from a very young age. I've always worked. Like I've just always tried to work as much as possible, even in university. Um, I was working while I was taking classes. I think if I'm not mistaken, the last 2 years, I was working like full time 9 to 5, and then I was taking classes on weekends and at night because in my mind, I just wanted to get a head start on my career. I didn't really know where I was going at the time, but I just figured more experience, more years doing stuff, the better. And that served me well, because then you have like real life experience. And yeah, I mean, I didn't, I would say the best lessons from university would be learning how to learning how to manage time, expectations, a little bit of networking, but I didn't go to like an Ivy League school. So it wasn't like I was meeting people whose dads were CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. It was useful. You can make a debate whether or not education is required, but I don't think it hurt, definitely. I don't think it helped as much as it could either. But
Yeah, you
yeah,
talk about inflection points. I know that, you start out your interviews or some of the ones I
yeah,
listen to, asking, what have been the inflection points in somebody's life. And I think that
yeah,
I'm around high school, right? I actually have a son who's right now in high school, and that pressure, and these questions that, at that age people ask, who do you want to be, right? What
yeah,
college will you go to? What will be your profession? Like, that's a huge inflection point, and sometimes it's a really, and it will change a lot about the trajectory, right? Whichever path you choose, um, kind of how your career or professional life, or including financial life, right, will start
yeah,
to take off. And so it's kind of like very interesting, and it ties into kind of how you said, about how everybody's journey is so unique. So I love
yes.
you hearing yours, because as people hear different stories, different journeys, sometimes we have to see it modeled, right, to imagine and kind of make it possible for ourselves, or take the pieces that apply.
Can I say one more thing too? I think it's really important to know that you asked me like what was an inflection point in my life, and then you said one of those that is prevalent in most people's lives is when they're trying to figure out what to do for a living when they're like whatever 16, 17. And I agree. And ironically, if thinking back to when I was that age, I always told people that I was going to be a lawyer. Like that's what I told people. But I told people that because that was an expectation and people accepted it as a good idea. And my parents were proud of me for having that idea, and society was proud of me for having that idea. But it's not really what I wanted. I think I'm just very fortunate that I had the courage to pursue something that I couldn't really define yet, but I knew that it was interesting to me. Because I think a lot of people feel that when they're 16, 17, and they create an identity for themselves. And I think a lot of people in that situation would say, I think most people would be happy if I'm a lawyer. Parents would be happy if I'm a lawyer. I'm going to start to turn that into my identity and I'm going to be a lawyer. And when they're 16, 17, very young, I think for a second they're like, "Oh, what about like they have this like they have this thought about what about all the other options I could do with my life?"
Mhm.
But I think that there's so much pressure to pursue something, especially at that age, that someone else seems to be acceptable because at that age nobody takes you seriously. Nobody thinks that you actually know what you're doing in life. So parents and teachers are trying to like implant and impose an idea of good career so that you don't screw up your own life. And I think some people accept that idea, and then that's the inflection point where they can either pursue something that is not what they actually want to do but is acceptable and promoted by the people around them, or they can do some deep work and see what actually excites them and then they can pursue that. And I think I'm blessed and very fortunate that I took the second path, but I don't think that many people do that. I think that most people just fall in line with it, the people around them closest to them say they should do. And I think that that's what creates, in some cases, not always, but in some cases, like depression, anxiety, discord, ultimately unhappy with the life they've built. Because if they go back in time, it wasn't even their idea to begin with, but they just did it because they're smart, competent people. They can do it,
Mhm.
but they never took that second thought when they really had the opportunity, and there was no sunk cost invested in this new idea to pursue something that they actually wanted to pursue. And I think that you were talking about people in your community, in your audience, that find themselves successful, quote air quote successful, job, kids, um, like good job, happy family, and they're like trying to pinpoint why they don't feel fulfilled. I think it's because most of their life has been imposed on them and they don't even realize it. And
Totally.
that's a tough conversation. That's like, it's, I don't have like an easy answer for when you wake up when you're like 50 and you're like, oh, my career, my entire life has sort of been like impositions and me saying yes to them versus me taking control. I think it's a really unsettling thought for people. I mean, there's definitely answers and there's definitely solutions. Um, but even accepting that your life is not your own, I think that's so uncomfortable that the majority of people will lie to themselves, even if at a later stage they're starting to understand that, because the truth is so scary to them. And that it's easier for them to suppress the truth and to keep living this unfulfilled, maybe slightly unhappy life than to think for even a second that they've lost 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. And it's kind of like with every step, no matter what age, but like if you start after high school taking these steps, with every step you are going further and further from your own truth, from
Yeah,
your own essence, and it snowballs. It then is harder to untangle, and kind of like the ship, right? You can, I think you can like steer it 1 degree to the right, and you will end up in a totally long
a
term,
thousand
in a
percent.
totally different place. And I was just talking about, or talking to somebody this week, who's son is in college and university right now, 3 years into it. And he knew in high school exactly what he loves to do. He was doing it like after hours, in addition to his classes. But there were so many people that were giving practical, realistic
Mm,
advice. But maybe you should really pick software engineering, computer science, right? Something that will convert into kind of the models, right, that are making money and providing for
mm,
livelihood. And then 3 years in, he's feeling like, do I drop the university entirely? Do I,
mm.
he just feels like everybody has picked a path that they are excited about, and inside he's not. And that's still relatively early, but this is kind of how this builds.
Well, it's sad because the, the the time in your life when you should be taking risk, which is when you're young because you have nothing to lose, is also the time when you are most likely to be persuaded by somebody not to take risk because all the people around you assume that you're young and you don't know what you're doing. So
Yeah.
it's actually very sad because that is the time between 18, 19, 20, 26 to 26, 27, when it doesn't really like outside of going to jail or dying, like
Yeah.
there's not really that much you can screw up because you can recover from pretty much anything else.
Yeah.
So it's a really sad reality. And I guess, I mean, I don't know how much this helps the people that are listening to this that are later on in their career, but just know that for their kids, I would assume that most of the people that you speak to, like they've achieved career success and they're at the point where they're trying to sort of map out their own life, or at least make sure that their kids' lives are set up properly. I think for kids in particular, or if you're at that stage listening to the show, um, like be okay taking risks. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but really, what are you going to screw up? Like, really, what are you going to screw up? Worst case scenario, if you want, and by risks, I mean doing something that is, it doesn't even have to be entrepreneurship. risk could be working for a startup. That's risky. There's a really good chance it's not going to work out. But if you're an early stage employee at a startup, which I think is a great experience, I think everybody should go through it. That's not you building. You're not like the founder, but you're still taking risk in your career. Or if you want to be more classic definition of entrepreneur, that's fine. But take the risk, because worst case scenario, you just learn a whole bunch of skills that are going to be so applicable. That's going to just like catapult you to incredible levels of career success if you go back into the workforce, or if you work at a startup and you learn everything about it and you do every single job as an employee number one or two, three, four, five, and the startup dies after 5 years and you're 26, you are so employable, because nobody who worked at Fortune 500 or like a Deloitte or Salesforce.com or pick a massive company, or even like a company in like a boring industry. Nobody who's worked from 21 to 26 in a big company versus somebody who's worked from 21 to 6 as early employee or as a true founder will have a fraction of the experience and business acumen that you have. You're going to outpace and outclass everyone. It's not even going to be a fair comparison. It's just the amount of exposure and problems that you're gonna have to deal with in like a more entrepreneurial startup environment. So take the risk, because in my mind, it's actually not risk. In my mind, there's only upside, because the true upside is massive amounts of money if it works, which is great. I mean, later on, when you get wiser, you'll realize there's other things that are more important. But when you're young, you care about money. And the worst possible scenario is you're just more employable and more skilled than all your peers at the same age. Like, I don't see that as risk, but for some reason, everybody thinks it's risk.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And I think no matter if we are 20, when we have a smaller perspective, right, and things seem bigger than they are,
Hmm.
or you're 30, 35, 40, I think we all can take more risk, no matter what.
Yeah, I agree. And Gary Vee is a big fan of this too. And I'll just parrot what he says. Like, it's never too late. You can see tons of examples of founders that and I always default to founders because that's kind of how people look at risk. There's tons of people that left their careers, started a company, were successful. Let's reframe risk for this audience. Say you've been in a job for 20, 25 years. Risk to you doesn't have to mean starting a company. Like, take more risk and be more aggressive with your career. Maybe don't just try and look for the next promotion. In fact, I'll tell you a story. One of the companies that I worked at, when I was like working for them, I was in sales, and I won't name the name of the company, but basically they had, uh, I wanted a promotion, and they had a set amount that they would increase somebody's pay, like I can't remember what, like a certain percentage, if they were promoted from within the company. And say for, just to illustrate a point, say it was like 5 or 7% if we did like an internal promotion. But if they hired somebody from outside the company, they would pay them, well, from the salary that I was at, about a 15% raise. So say that I was making like 70,000,
Mhm.
and then if I got an internal promotion, I'd be making like what, like 75, 76,000. If I was hired external, I could be making like 80, 85,000. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It's the same job. Why are you penalizing somebody who's in the company versus somebody who you're bringing from another company? And my boss at the time, he's like, they do it because they want to incentivize people to quit the competitors and come here. But if you're already with us, like, you're not going anywhere. Like, we're giving you more money. You should just be grateful. And I'm like, that's insane. He's like, yeah, it is insane, but that's like the company policy.
It happens
And
over and over and over
I
again.
know. And you know what he made me do? He's like, Scott, we were good friends, and he was like a mentor to me. He's like, Scott, uh, I want you to hand in your resignation, put it on my desk, and then I'll hire you as an outside employee. And he's like, there's no rule against that. And that's what happened. And I was like, this is insane. This is absolutely the dumb. And he's like, it's stupid, but we're gonna, because you're worth that extra. And it wasn't even that much. I mean, compared to what this company makes, but you're worth that extra. So this is how we're going to play the game. If they want to play this game, we're going to play the game. We're going to do it. We're going to play within the gray area and give you the money that you deserve. The whole point of that story is like be aggressive with your career and understand that sometimes the company doesn't have your best interest in mind. And if you want to make more money, if that's the goal, if you want the title, if you want the new title, you want the bigger title, you want the bigger check, maybe you're aggressive with your career. Maybe you leave the company and go somewhere else, even though you're like, oh, I've been here 20 years, I'm loyal. I get loyalty. Nothing wrong with loyalty. I don't have an issue with you leaving a company if you've been there 20 years. I have an issue leaving a company you've been there 6 months. That's a different story. You've been loyal when you've been there for an extended period of time.
Mhm.
Serve yourself, serve your interests. You're not like the company doesn't give a shit about you.
Mhm.
Like they care, but they don't care. Like they don't want anything bad to happen to you, but at the same time, like if you die or if you leave, they'll find someone else.
Mhm.
So understand that, and I think a lot of people saw this with COVID because like they were like 30 years and they were laid off. So be more aggressive about your career, and maybe that's the risk you should take and not start a company. Because if you play that game enough, I'm not saying play the game to screw the company over, but play the game to serve yourself. Because again, you, depending on what you believe, you live once on this earth, right? So you want to live the best life you can, and a lot of it is just about being more aggressive and serving yourself. And by the way, I don't think that you should do it in a shady way, meaning I don't think you should join companies and leave immediately and play that game of like, oh, I'm going to join a company just to get a certain salary, then I'm going to use that to like get another salary. I still think that commitment is important, but don't be scared to make realistic commitments. So if you switch companies, you tell the person that is hiring you, and I think the person hiring you should also make an agreement with you. Say, hey, I'm going to give 2 years of my life to you. I'm going to give you my best for 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is. And then I need to make X amount at the end of 3 years, and I need to have this title at the end of 3 years. And I'm not going to like quiet quit on you. I'm just telling you that we're committing to each other for 3 years. And when you cut the bullshit and you just have radically candid conversations with companies, the right company will respect that. I'd respect that because now a couple things happen as a hiring person. I understand how long they're going to be with me. I understand where they want to go. I understand if I can even get them there as an organization. Do I have the budget to increase the salary if they hit the KPIs? Do I have the title? Do I have the level of organization where I can give them the manager, director, VP role? And if not, then I'm going to work with them to get there, but I'm going to get the best out of them while they're here. So I'm not worried about them for the last 8 months taking interviews and doing, not doing the work. I'm not worried about that because we've committed to 3 years. So we know the game we're playing and we're not lying to each other. I think that's a really healthy way to hire, and I think it's more realistic. But I think that that's a whole other conversation. I think that more people have to be aggressive with their careers and be candid about what they want with their employers and understand that their employers are actually serving their best interests. And that would be the risk, quote unquote, risk that I would take, even though it's not a risk, but the risk that I would take if I don't feel like starting a business, but I'm later on in my career.
And you're talking about essentially you are the CEO of your career.
A
So that's
thousand percent of your life, of your career, all of it.
right. And you owe it to yourself. You owe it to your family, right? You owe it to your life because, like you said, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, it is your life. And I
Yeah.
think we are too haphazard. So many people, including I've done it too, where we kind of just like take a seat and sit too much back, if you will.
We
You know,
get, yeah, like cruise, like autopilot, like cruise control. Like we don't take our careers, we're not aggressive about it because we get comfortable. And then that cliche is true too. Like everything you want is on the other side of like outside your comfort zone, right? Like on the other side of hard decisions and hard conversations. And yeah, it's all true. It's all true. It's all uncomfortable. It's all true. But at the end of the day, it's all worth it. That's the that's the takeaway.
but also moving, right? Moving quickly as soon as you do have the clarity and accept the human nature that there will be times, right, where you'll be comfortable, maybe in cruise control, but as soon as you realize it, right, take action in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's jump into some of the topics that you cover on your podcast. I thought they are so relevant and so applicable. And honestly, they were kind of the way that you phrase things and the way that you look at them were ahas to me. Like you said, there are people who, yeah, sure, I have heard from Tony Robbins talk about ambitious, setting big
Hmm.
goals. But I'd love for you to speak a bit more of how realistic and reasonable goals are not serving us and it's actually bad advice where competition is the fiercest.
Yes. So, you're speaking about a piece that I wrote about a while ago, not so long ago, but basically, it's a very simple idea. So, when we're looking at sort of reasonable goals or what reasonable success is, we are kind of competing with the rest of the world who's also setting reasonable goals because we are influenced from a very early age. Not all of us, but I think the majority of us are influenced to sort of, how do I put this politely? It like audacity and saying that we're going to be the richest or the best or the most successful, like it's not generally it's not generally encouraged. I don't think that I think for a variety of different reasons. I think that one, people don't encourage there usually this all this happens in early childhood. Don't encourage their children to not they want them to be the best, but they don't want to hear their kids say, I'm gonna make us I'm gonna make more money than God. Like if kids said that to most parents, the kids would be like, I don't know if that's the right ambition for you. Now, money may not be the correct ambition, but I think that what we do is we try and put people into boxes, whether or not it's because we think that if they aren't in boxes, their life's not going to be good and it's going to be stressful. And we don't want that for that person. We kind of want their life to not be too stressful. I think, again, as parents speaking to kids, I also think that sometimes when we encourage people to be mediocre or to strive for reasonable goals, it's because uh, usually the people that encourage people to strive for reasonable goals are people that could not achieve their own goals themselves. So I think subconsciously they don't want anyone else to do better than they did in life. And I think that that sometimes happens with parents to a degree, not all the time, but it definitely happens with like peers. And I think that so many people get these signals and these inputs to strive for reasonable goals or reasonable career, or that's not for that type of career is not for you, or that amount of money is not for you, or that amount of success is not for you. And for the variety of the reasons I just mentioned, whether or not it's coming from a place of protection or a place of almost subconscious jealousy, a lot of people listen to that and then they also strive for quote unquote reasonable goals. And the irony in what I was writing about with that piece is that when you strive for reasonable goals, because the majority of people deem these goals to be reasonable, you are competing in the most to use a business term, a red ocean. You're competing with so many other people that these reasonable goals are actually more challenging to achieve. And it's not just that more challenging to achieve. If you do achieve them, the result is subpar. The result is insignificant and mediocre compared to if you try to pursue unreasonable goals, meaning and unreasonable has to be defined based on your on what unreasonable is to you. Unreasonable doesn't mean $100 million exit, but unreasonable could mean starting a business that makes 500 to $1 million a year and you're just doing it as yourself and you have a 90+% profit margin. Maybe that's an unreasonable goal for you because you came from a family where people were expecting 60 to $70,000 per year paychecks working for a company. So I think that defining unreasonable is important. But once you start to pursue unreasonable goals, um, that's when you can separate yourself from the pack because so few people are aspiring to achieve those unreasonable goals, to push boundaries, to do things that are uncomfortable, to do things the way that they have never been done or haven't been done by a large group of people. And I think that when you set these unreasonable goals and then you incorporate a second idea that I believe in into your life, which is if you pursue something long enough and you're a smart person and you learn from your failures and you take those lessons and you use it to improve and optimize and iterate, you will find a way to eventually become successful. So and I fully believe this. If you commit 10 to 15 plus years at whatever it is you're doing, you're going to find a way to become some version of successful at it. So when I think you pair unreasonable goals with playing the game long enough and being in the arena long enough and learning from your mistakes and not giving up too soon, I think that you end up living, by most people's definition, an unreasonable and incredible life. So I think that that's where I wish more people would put their energy towards. Find an unreasonable goal, commit an exceptional amount of time towards that goal. Not only are less people pursuing that goal, but when you do achieve it, and I'm telling you that you will, because I'm telling you that it's inevitable that you will achieve it if you commit a certain period of time to it, um, your life is going to be like something you could never even have imagined. And I want to really highlight the fact that it's not going to be easy. Anything worth doing is not going to be easy. Making $500 to $1 million a year in a company is not going to be easy. Building a company that exits is not going to be easy. Um, Building a company that's a lifestyle business that makes you $1 million a year is also not going to be easy. It's all hard work, but it's not complicated or confusing work, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like if you look at, it's going to be hard work for sure, but if you try and unpack any of those sort of three three outcomes that most people would say, that's like, if I've achieved these, I'm set for life, in career or in entrepreneurship, you can learn the skills to get there, and you can reverse engineer how someone else has gotten there, and you can stay in the game long enough to achieve those kinds of results. I mean, in a career, you can move into a VP or a C-suite position. You can be strategic. You can move into a VP or C-suite position in a Fortune 500. If you are young in your career, um, now, 10 years ago, I would say go to school to learn how to code and to be a software developer. And if you are a software developer for a significant period of time, and then you are strategic about your career, and you start to work for FANG, so Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, you're going to be making $500 to $1 million plus per year as a software developer. Now with AI, that's a whole other conversation about what you should focus on. But if you're smart about it, the point is you can figure out a way to achieve what someone else would deem to be unreasonable. And the most beautiful thing about life is that you really only have to figure it out once to live this life that most people would only dream about. Um, so that's why I suggest that people pursue unreasonable goals, because my argument is that any goal is actually achievable. So why would you set yourself up to achieve something that isn't even really what you want to achieve, which would be, in my opinion, a definition of a reasonable goal.
And what also kind of illustrated the point to me, because I think it's so, when you explain it this way, it makes sense, but then it's so counterintuitive in a way that we think, okay, going for the job, right? Going,
Yeah,
pursuing safe steps, kind of one step after the other, is the safe path. But you actually talked about the example of what happened to you. You were looking for a job, and it took you what, like months and 200, 300 applications. And I'd love for you to share that example because it's so relevant in today's economy.
yeah.
There have been
Well,
a
so
lot of
this is my story, like sort of coming out of university. And yes, the story is like I put in so much energy into chasing like a reasonable
Mhm.
job, like a reasonable job, right? That out of university, what do you expect to make? Like 70, $80,000 as an undergrad if you're not in law. And I 200 to 300 resumes is conservative, like very conservative. I put out a lot of resumes for a reasonable job. Meanwhile, I had a friend who was he was very entrepreneurial, and he was always entrepreneurial. And basically, when you graduate university, you're like 24, right? 23,
Right.
24-ish. So basically, we were same age. I was applying for tons of jobs, doing like the reasonable path, and he was more entrepreneurial. He had no interest in applying for jobs. He was just basically, he was very technical. So he was monetizing like the business. If I remember, the business was a little bit more technical than I understood, but he was like basically helping companies with like security and IT, like enterprise companies with security and IT. He was highly technical, and he was going in as a consultant. And and some of the like obviously like first when he started reaching out to sort of monetize his expertise with companies, it's like crickets, you don't get anything. But like some of the retainers he was hitting were like 5, 10, $15,000 retainers, which again, if you do the math, a monthly retainer of five for $10,000 is $120,000 a year.
Mhm.
So if you get a few of these, you've already out earned by setting an unreasonable goal of being an entrepreneur and trying to monetize your expertise or your services for a company. That's for most people is an unreasonable goal, right? That's risky. Yeah, and he was making probably three to $400,000 at 24 years old, and his margins were exceptional because it was just him working in the company. And that was the comparison of reasonable, me busting my ass for months to try and make $60,000-$70,000 versus him also working hard at an unreasonable goal and like massively out earning me right out of university. So I think that that's a pretty yeah. I hope that somebody takes something away from that. Not that there's anything wrong with applying for a job, but know that when you apply for, something that is, or when you apply yourself to something that's a little bit unreasonable, um, the results can be, sometimes it's not even more work. That's also another interesting idea. If I had applied the same amount of work to building my own company, like right out of university, I probably would have found a way to become successful at it. But it's, I didn't do that mostly because that was not the world that I came from. So I had to like almost deprogram myself
Mhm.
from my existing worldview, which I think is what plagues a lot of people. They sort of been like they've been programmed a certain way as to what life should look like and the expectations and the path they should follow, and it's really hard for you to pursue something else. Uh, it takes a lot of deprogramming, and I think that it's taken me a couple years to do that. Some people don't do it their entire life, and they're always sort of stuck with their original programming. So.
So maybe walk us through how did you connect the dots, right? From having this framework, right? Thinking,
Mhm.
okay, the law path is practical, but then you're
Yeah.
feeling something's out of line, so something's out of sync. And then how did you connect the dots to, it sounds like you had a career, you ended up in some sort of sales and
Yeah, it
marketing
was a sales role.
leaderships, and then to entrepreneurship and to podcasting
Because
as
I
well.
saw, so I think I was always a super curious person, and I saw one of the companies that I was working at was acquired,
Mm.
and I just kept looking for different signals of like what would be the best path for me to pursue. And one company was acquired, and that was sort of validation that this entrepreneurship thing seems pretty damn cool, and it's something that I'm interested in, and I like to build stuff. And if somebody else can figure it out, I can figure it out too. These are all like convictions that I've had. And I think that you have to be, I also think that people are so focused on their work sometimes that almost to a fault, they get their programming from their parents and school and their immediate community, and they get it at a young age, and then they just go on autopilot, and they don't ever question their reality ever again. I was always wondering, like, what if? What if I build my own company? What if I had an exit? What if I did something that was radically different from what I knew growing up? I was always so curious. I think that's probably one of the most useful traits that anybody can have, just absolute, like, incredible amounts of curiosity. Because if you don't have that, then you never look up. And if you
Mhm.
never look up, life passes very quickly. It's very, very quick. We think it's like, like I can't remember the saying. It's like days are long, but whatever days are long, but years are quick, or something along the lines. But it's so true. Like if we never look up and question what we're doing, it's very easy to get into routines that last for decades. And even, the best companies in the world, they have to disrupt themselves so that they don't become irrelevant. That's why Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. I think that we have to do the same thing. I think that we have to create space in our life to question, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to swear, but like, what the fuck am I working on right now? I mean, why am I doing it? Like, really, why is this important to me? And is it because my parents told me it was a good thing to do? Is it because uh, I identify with my job now and my friends know me because of the work that I do, and it'd be embarrassing to switch it up and to try something else? Is it because something deeper than that, and I'm not even aware of why I'm doing the work that I'm doing? I have never even I don't give myself the space to look inside and have the self-awareness or go into my subconscious and understand what's driving my decisions day to day. I, I, I think that people have to just create space uh, to reevaluate. Another idea, like I know you picked up some stuff from, like, I guess my newsletter that I write out, and another idea that I love is a concept that I actually discovered from Justin Welsh, who's another great creator. And he wrote a LinkedIn post about it. Then I took the idea and ran with it and expanded on it, and then I wrote a whole newsletter about it. But it was the concept of dying every day. And what does this mean? It's basically that at the end of the day, assume that that version of you is dying, and when you wake up in the morning, you have this fresh slate. You can choose to work on whatever you want. You can choose to be with whoever you want. You can choose to take on whatever you want. Now, people are going to be like, well, that's a ridiculous idea. You can't just give up on anything that you've been working on for a period of time every single morning. It doesn't make any sense. You're correct. It doesn't. It doesn't if you assume that you're giving up on them, but you're not giving up on them. What you are doing is every single morning, you are actively choosing what you want to work on and where you want to spend your time and what you do in your day. You're saying, I am choosing this because I want to do it today, not because there's a sunk cost of me doing it for the past 10 years. That is the difference. And too many people go through their life just in a career, in a relationship, in a mode because they've been doing it for 10 years and it's just the way it's always been done. The idea of dying every day and waking up fresh and choosing what you are doing because you want to every single day, that is as close as I can think of to disrupting yourself. And I think that that is required. And I think that if for some reason you wake up and say you have this imaginary blank slate in front of you, and you go through the mental exercise of thinking, hey, if I didn't have previous obligation, I would choose to work on this, or I would choose to work at this company, or I would choose to date this person. If the answer is no, that is a huge red flag. Now, I'm not saying that you take immediate action that blows up your life, but I am saying that if you wake up and the answer isn't a definite yes, that's when you understand that you are not in alignment with who you are. And then that's where the journey starts of figuring out, why am I not in alignment? And if more people went through that exercise more often, they'd be more happy. But I don't even think many people go through that thought process. Forget once a day. I think people don't go through it their entire lives.
I think it's great. What you're mentioning would be great to do every month because
Hmm.
if I translate kind of the discontent, the general discontent around work, career, if you look from engagement, workplace engagement surveys, that Gallup puts out to
Yeah.
just a general sentiment of people looking forward to Fridays, right? And
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah. Of
crossing off
course.
their Monday through Fridays, for the weekend or holidays, or like you said, the once or twice a year vacations. This is a great exercise to do like every month. And kind of what it ties into is that most people are doing, people who are discontent, right? Who have that feeling that something is missing, that they know deep down inside, if they had a choice, if they thought they had a choice, they would choose not to do 50, 60, 70% plus of
Yeah.
the activities that they are doing on day to
Yeah.
day.
That's sad. That's very sad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But so this is kind of a great tool, right? Where you can start. And I wanted to ask you actually, given everything that you know, right? Your experience, and you actually have had the courage and the clarity and call it whatever you want, but the strength to actually early on look at things, listen to yourself, even if
Yeah.
you don't know it 100% clearly, you're iterating, you're pivoting, you're being agile, right? And I think that's where many people lose their time, right? Where kind of
Sure.
those years and the time just passes by much quicker than we actually think on day-to-day basis. But what would be your advice, given everything that your experience so far, if somebody is in that place, and most likely they already have years of experience and success within a field, like you said, 10, 15 years, yes, you have this success, but you might have picked the wrong lane. But you kind of know, okay, in general, yes, I want to maintain my home, right, my livelihood,
Mhm.
those general terms of um, success or standard of living, right? But they don't know
Yes.
what to do. What would be your advice to figure out those goals, that North Star, to start working towards?
A few things. I think that so you know the concept of ikigai.
Maybe you can give an overview.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple different versions of this, but basically, the best way to figure out where you should spend most of your energy in life, Ikigai is one framework. There's a few other frameworks, but basically, imagine a Venn diagram, right? So, all these different circles, and in one circle, you have what you're good at, and in another circle, you have what the world needs, and in another circle, you have um, what you can monetize, and I think there's one more circle, but I can't remember it. But the point is like what you're good at what the world needs or what the market needs and what you can monetize. And the intersection of that Venn diagram where all the circles overlay is that's the work you should do. That is the work that usually makes people most fulfilled. So that means that if I guess what did I say? What you're good at, what the world needs, what you can monetize, and then also what you enjoy. Excuse me. That I guess that would be the fourth circle. That's an important piece of it. And when you overlay these circles, however, whatever you call it, ikigai or some other framework, that there's a couple similar ones. That's the work. That's the work that you would feel most fulfilled doing, and the work that will actually pay for your life, right? So I think that once you do that exercise, that's a very easy, quick way to at least directionally set a North Star or a goal for where you want to head. Now, once you've gone through that exercise, um, then I would say you can understand all the different potential ways that you can achieve that North Star. So it can be through working for a company, maybe a different one. It can be through entrepreneurship. I mean, it can be through volunteering. Maybe you don't want your vocation to be directly tied to this. I would suggest you do, but maybe you find a way to um, like listen, if you're a neurosurgeon and you want to start knitting, there's only so many ways that you can replace the salary of a neurosurgeon via knitting, and probably entrepreneurship is the most viable way. I don't think you're going to be working for like a yarn company and be making the same amount of money as a neurosurgeon in the short term. So I think you have to understand like the most viable path to achieve that North Star that you set for yourself,
Mhm.
and then you de-risk the journey to get there. Um, so if it is a massive shift from like a super high salary job to you want to replace that salary, I think entrepreneurship is definitely an answer. If it's less of a risky move and you don't have a super high salary, then you can achieve that through career. But de-risk the move by starting the thing that's going to replace the salary that aligns with your North Star and gradually building out that thing in your downtime. Like this is a very easy way to move towards
Mhm.
that particular ikigai Venn diagram North Star. Like the ridiculous example I just gave, if you are a neurosurgeon and you really truly do love knitting, like you would start creating content around knitting. You would open up a Shopify store. You'd figure out if you want to sell a product that relates to knitting, and you would be learning all the functions of building a business that is around knitting because that is your passion
Mhm.
after you get off your shift or on the weekends, and you'd carve out time for that. And it is an absolutely ridiculous example. But if you understand how to build a business around, or your content could be monetized because you build an audience and a cult following around it, or a little community around it, and advertisers come, or you build a community around knitting and you pay people pay $5 a month and it's like a knitting support group. I don't care how you do it. There's a million different business models, but the point is that that is actually a viable path to quit a job that probably pays start neurosurgeons, I'm sure, make 700,000, $1 million plus a year if you're exceptional. So you want to replace a salary like that, you can make it with a Shopify store. It's not impossible. It's not going to be in the next 6 months, but if you do this for the next 4 or 5 years, watch how you have now made an e-commerce environment. You figured out all the content, all the marketing, because you're a smart person. I didn't say that there's no learning involved in this transfer, but you figured out how to run ads, you figured out how to hire good people, and all of a sudden, you've built this small little e-commerce empire that nets you $700 to $1 million a year with 2 employees, really high profit margins. And now your work is replacing your salary. Sorry, your income from your job is replacing your work. So if an example as ridiculous as that can happen, then you can pursue whatever you want to pursue literally at any point in your life. And now the barrier to entry for entrepreneurship is so low, that I would even say that entrepreneurship in some cases, if you are willing to put in the hours and to be a self-taught individual, I think that sometimes entrepreneurship is even less risky than switching jobs, because you can do it at your leisure and the tools are all there and it's not expensive. And you can learn from podcasts like this and a million other podcasts online exactly what you have to do for every single thing you're ever going to have to figure out. So that would be what I would tell somebody to do. Now, most people are going to listen to this and not do it. I get it, because it's uncomfortable and it's a lot of energy and work and it's time consuming. But then again, I'll just make the argument like you only live once.
Mhm.
So like you can complain and you can argue, but Scott, that's not, I have kids and I have responsibilities. Totally understand. Totally understand. And I wouldn't fault you if you chose to stay in your current situation. Just know that somebody with more responsibilities, somebody whose life is more difficult, has more stress, has more anxiety than you, has already figured it out.
Mm.
That's all I would say, because that is always the case. So I don't care how difficult your life circumstances are. Someone has already figured it out. So if you want to figure it, it's not to say that it's bad that you're not figuring it out. I don't think that many people want to. It's very stressful to radically shift your life at a later stage. I'm just making the argument that it's possible. So if you really want it bad enough, you will figure it out. And if you don't, that's also okay. But know that it's possible. Don't ever think that what you want to achieve is not possible. That's the biggest lie. Even if it's in a crazy idea like becoming a knitting e-commerce store brand owner and quitting your job as a neurosurgeon. There have been crazier shifts that have been made.
I love that. I love the example, the extreme example. But you know what? It's brilliant because, in a way, okay, you do your Venn diagram,
Yeah,
whatever works for you. I actually recommend that people better understand their natural strong functions and kind of use that to zero in or
yeah, it's a good
in on
idea.
the thing. But at least when you do it, right, take even one step whenever the time is right. It could be tomorrow, or like you said, if you have small children, it could be in 2 years, right? There's
Yeah,
no fault in that, or
no
there's no
fault,
right
zero
and
fault.
wrong. But when you take it, you're beta testing, and then you might find out 2 months down the road you don't like it. It's actually, was a nice idea, but actually better remaining as a hobby. So either way, you kind of can look back and iterate, either take the steps at your own pace,
Yeah.
uh, or you beta test it and it doesn't work out. And now you don't have to spend the next 5 years daydreaming
I
about
think the worst thing is like what's wondering if, right? You've heard of like Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework. That's why he left Wall Street to start Amazon. The mental model that he uses to make decisions is, if I'm on my, my deathbed and with my last breath, am I going to regret anything that I did or didn't do in life? And he makes all decisions through that lens.
it.
So if he thinks that he'd regret not trying, then he'll decide to try.
Mm.
It's very simple, and I know that listen, I know that whenever I have this conversation, people will get angry because they'll be like, you don't understand my situation. I have no time. I understand. I do understand your situation. I'm just telling you that it's always possible. And also, I would say that there are extreme cases where people truly have no time because they're working 3 jobs, and like I empathize so much with difficult life situations. But on the other end, I also know that people like to make excuses more than they really should. And there are some people that do not have the most difficult life situations, and they're like, "Oh, well, I can't like watch like TV, and I can't, I like I'm tired at the like that." Those are not fucking excuses. Those are fucking excuses. Excuse me. Those are not fucking reasons to not go through this process. Um, so, anyways, that's my 2 cents on that. Obviously, you're gonna have a hard time convincing me not to take risk because that's the way that I've lived my life. But um, I would recommend that if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, still do this exercise so that you can architect your career, and you're working for somebody doing the work that you actually like to do, and that person that person is paying you what you're worth, and they're sort of showing you the respect you deserve as somebody who is, a professional. So whether or not you choose to start a company, or just be more aggressive about your career, I still think you should go through this exercise to figure out, like, is the life you're living really the life that you want?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a big question. So I love it. And can we talk about anxiety? I knew that in one of your podcasts, I heard you talk about experiencing it yourself. And I think stories like that, help others understand that they're not the only ones dealing with it, but also understand how and feel that it doesn't have to be crippling or it doesn't have to prevent. Maybe the best
Mhm.
use of words would be it doesn't have to prevent still um, you from setting bigger goals and going for what you want.
So basically, both her and I, so Mara Dorn and myself, um, there have been times where, like, when it's like a super, it happened more when I first started speaking. Um, but I get like heart palpitations sometimes. I think a lot of people get nervous when they speak. It's like the most common fear in the world. But I get like heart palpitations. I would like get like sweaty, and like I'd start to feel like I would pass out, like almost pass out. And it would take everything to like, keep my shit together and not pass out. And there's been times where like I almost have, and it's gotten much better. Um, because I kind of know there's this thing that happens in some people where, um, if you like stand up too quick, it doesn't happen often. It's not like when I stand up from a chair, I'm like passing out. Or if you're like stressed out, uh, it's like a protection mechanism that your body deploys, but it's like not really that useful because you just feel like you're gonna pass out, and some people actually do. But anyways, so any sort of anxiety inducing events, it used to like really trigger me. And she had the same thing, and you feel like you're like kind of having like a heart attack, but also you're passing out. Just like a really shitty feeling. I think being aware that it's like a thing that happens in certain environments, like understanding what it was part of the reason that allowed me to sort of get over it.
For you, it's more like with public speaking when you feel.
Yeah, it's public speaking, that stresses me out. I think that stresses a lot of people out. I think that sort of tools that I've used to get over that sort of anxiety feeling, box breathing or inhaling and holding, are very helpful tools, like inhaling my breath and holding my breath for a second, because there's different kinds of anxiety too, right? There's just general anxiety, and it probably stems from imposter syndrome if you are feeling like you're not qualified for the work that you do. That general anxiety that's difficult. You're not just going to have like a breathing technique that's going to immediately get over your anxiety. I think there's other strategies uh, that help people that have anxiety with taking risks, or applying for a job that they're maybe only 80% qualified to take. I think there's other strategies that you should use. And one of the strategies I speak about quite often is keeping track of the wins that you had in your life, because we as humans are very good at remembering all the times we didn't win and that we failed. And even though the percentage of times we failed compared and contrasted with the amount of times that we've won is radically different, like we win several times every single day, whereas our failures, even though they're few and far between, that's what we remember. And I think that's what gives a lot of anxiety and imposter syndrome if we're just taking on like another risk in life. But for situational anxiety, which is like stepping on stage or walking into a big meeting or like stuff like that, I would say that breath work helps. I would say that not having caffeine definitely helps. I would say that preparation helps. Um, and those three things, I mean, it sounds so simple, but being prepared with the content or the talk I'm going to give, being prepared if I'm going to a presentation with, knowing my numbers, knowing my deck inside out, doing some breath work and not over caffeinating myself, that for me helps quite a bit. And also, I would say that the other sort of kind of shitty advice that I have is that whatever thing gives you anxiety, it's not going to be fun advice for people to hear, but you got to find a way to do that thing more often. So for speaking, which is what gave me the most anxiety, and now it's like it doesn't stress me at all. But with speaking, it gave me the most anxiety, and a lot of, by the way, anxiety is from like early childhood trauma. I remember doing like presentations in grade school, and I was just like scared shitless, and I think that just carried over into an adult. But um, uh, I sought out and was doing cold outreach to every single business conference, every single friend I had that put on an event, small, big, all over Miami and South Florida. That's where I live now. And I would ask everyone and anyone to put me on stage, and they'd be like, "Well, Scott, that seems kind of like a stupid idea to do if the one thing that gives you anxiety is stepping on stages." And I'm like, "Yes, but I also know that just exposing myself to it enough is part of the secret of getting over anxiety." So by doing as many presentations as I possibly could and every single, not at the end, but at the beginning, every single time, I still had this feeling. Like it's not like just because you set it up, you don't have this feeling. So you still have this feeling. But then like after the first five, it's like a little bit less. And then like 10, it's like a little bit less. And then it's a little bit less. And then you combine that with all the other ideas I just mentioned. And then fast forward to however many times I've spoken on stage in my life, now it's doesn't exist. And the same could be said for what gives people anxiety: talking to investors, talking to a big customer, going into an interview for a new job, speaking to, they're trying to speak to a girl and they're trying to date, like whatever the thing is, going to the gym in January if you haven't gone into the gym in years, whatever the
Starting a
thing is,
knitting business.
starting a knitting business, anything that gives you anxiety, like exposure therapy is it's uncomfortable, but it's so effective. So I architected ways to constantly expose myself to the thing that I hated. And now I'm not bad at it. And now it definitely doesn't give me anxiety, which I don't really care if I'm good or bad at it. I just care about not feeling like I'm going to pass out
Mhm.
and have a heart attack when I'm on stage. That's all I cared about. And it was just through repeat exposure that it really helped me.
So you literally put yourself into the fire, like
Yeah,
doing it,
repeatedly,
doing it.
repeatedly again and again and again and again. I mean, you when you started this podcast, I'm sure you feel the same way, because when I started this podcast, I had the same, not as much because it's like through a screen.
Mhm.
I didn't start
Sure.
this podcast in person, but I still had anxiety when I started the show. And how do I get over that? Like, there's not that many tricks. I've done like, I think like, how many episodes are we on? They're not all interviews, but we have like about 800 episodes
Mhm.
up. Like, you lose the anxiety when you just do the hard thing for an extended period of time.
Yeah. And the reason also I wanted to talk about it is because sometimes people can hold themselves back because, something is uncomfortable or, gives them anxiety.
Sometimes, all the time, people hold themselves back because of that. Yes.
Yes, so put yourself in the fire. So, Scott, how did you arrive at podcast being the thing and, um, yeah, being your mission right now?
Um, so the podcast, we've spoken a lot about like future proofing yourself. So you can't be complacent with your job or your career. Podcasting was future proofing myself. So I wanted to build something that it didn't matter what I did in the future. If I started my own company, if I wanted to sell a product or service, I wanted to work for somebody. Like I'm a marketer. Like I watch the Gary V's and the Seth Godins of the world, and I see what they do, and I saw like what Gary V built and how he launched companies against his audience. And I think that podcasting is one of the four kinds of leverage, right? If you're a Naval Ravikant fan, he has a beautiful thread on Twitter about the four kinds of leverage, which there's technology, there's people, there's media, and there's finance. These are the four kinds of leverage that you can use in anything business related. And the podcast is media leverage. And I thought if I build an audience and I build a podcast and I build a community, and the podcast in particular was because it was a style of content that I enjoyed consuming, and it's also what I enjoy creating. I could have also done the same thing with TikTok, or I also write a newsletter, but podcast was for me enjoyable, and enjoyable is like a key metric if I'm going to stick with it for a long enough period of time. So um, I knew that I wanted to build some sort of leverage, and media leverage you can build. It's very hard to sort of build the other kinds of leverage unless you're technical or you have a lot of money. But media leverage is a piece of leverage that anybody can build. And I knew that in the future, if I stick with it long enough, it'll be successful and it'll be useful for whatever it is that I want to use it for in the future. And podcasting was just the type of content that I enjoyed the most. And I again believe that if you're going to stick with it for a long enough period of time, you're going to find a way to be successful at it. Very hard to not be successful if you do something for 20 years. It's very hard. So I knew that I wanted to stay with it. And that's why I started the podcast. And also, I mean, there's other reasons too. Like I learned more with the podcast than I ever even dreamed of because of the opportunity to interview and chat with people. But that's why I started it.
Awesome. How many years have you been doing it?
Just I think almost 6 years. 6 years.
Amazing. And what are the other criteria? You mentioned enjoyable for you is one of the criteria. Sounds like maybe learning and growth.
Well, that was sort of like my own I guess it was my own icky guy, right? Like I enjoy having conversations and learning from people. I'm competent at the things required to grow a podcast. I know how to edit video, write a great email when a new episode goes up. I know how to get a good guest on. So I was competent at all those things, and I saw that there was a market for it. There's always a market for education and entertainment. That was sort of my own icky guy. And then, yeah, like, do I enjoy it is probably the most important for me. I would say that like weighted, do I enjoy it is the most important metric for me in that Venn diagram, because if I enjoy it, then I'll stick with it long enough to figure out all the other pieces.
Love it. So, Scott, I want to really commend you for being an example, you
Thank
know,
you.
being an example for courage, for having such goals, the way of looking at things already from an early age and kind of looking at your life, pivoting, taking steps, right? Taking courageous action, and now sharing. So much goodness with a lot of people. I encourage everybody to check out the Success Story podcast
Thank
because
you.
I truly think that you will benefit and you will have many ahas and new ways of looking at things and also using what Scott is sharing on day-to-day basis. Honestly, I have played that unreasonable goals episode several times. So I think that what you create, the content you create is really awesome. So thank you for doing that. Can you tell people how they can find you and connect with you, and anything else you want to add? Because I will definitely link the show notes or in the show notes, the links
Yeah.
to your Instagram and your podcast for easy access.
I appreciate you so much for having me on. Thank you. And thank you for building such a great podcast, such an amazing community. Um, if people like podcasts, you named it like Success Story Podcast is my show. I do a lot of this stuff that we're doing right now, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Um, I guess successstorypodcast.com is probably the easiest way to find all the links. And then on social, it's all at Scott D. Clary. And that's the same across every single social. So that's pretty much it. I appreciate these are great questions. This is a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. You asked me about some stuff that I haven't really spoken about that often. So these are my favorite shows. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.